Okay, Sergio Corbucci's 1967 movie, The Great Silence, or The Big Silence, depending on what cut you're watching, because the film, as over time's gone by both titles, is an excellent spaghetti western from Sergio Corbucci. Corbucci is, to my mind, the John Ford of the Italian western. Maybe second only in terms of classic Italian auteurs to Sergio Leone, of course, who did the Dollars trilogy with Clint Eastwood, and of course Once Upon a Time in the West. But Sergio Corbucci made a year, but on this DVD year, you have got the alternative ending as a special feature. It's completely silent because it was never used, it was never dubbed into English or any of the other languages these films were often dubbed into, and so it's narrated by Alex Cox, noted film critic Alex Cox, who absolutely loves The Big Silence, and he's not the only one, or The Great Silence. Now, I've made a lot of notes, but in the book, Once Upon a Time in the Italian West by Howard Hughes, the book Spaghetti Westerns, listed it as number 5, that's The Big Silence. As I say, The Big Silence is the same movie as The Great Silence. It's often gone by both names. Now, let's talk a little bit about a plot here. So basically, the main character in this film is called, which was kind of taking the character that Eastwood played in A Fistful of Dollars for a Few Dollars More, and the cast list of this movie, of course, is, as I says, Jean-Louis Trintignant playing Silence. We have Frank Wolff playing a semi-comedic sheriff character, very good, and we have Klaus Kinski as the bounty hunter loco, and it is Kinski who rules this film. He steals every scene he's in. Now, Wolff, who plays the semi-comedic Sheriff Burnett role in this movie, was best known at the time for appearing in several movies for Roger Corman. All of the characters in The Great Silence, or The Big Silence, whichever version you prefer, whichever title you prefer, are troubled, dark characters. And it is only the sheriff that allows for a little bit of comedic. And right at the end of the film, where there's the big showdown with the bounty hunters, we feel that Silence is going to pull it off, even though his gun hand is injured, which again is a copy of the scene in the Eastwood Leone movies, where Eastwood's character, the man with no name, the stranger Joe Blondie, call him what you may, is beaten up and left for dead by the bandits. But Corbucci completely subverts that, and it is actually our hero, our main character, who is gunned down, and the bad guys, the bounty hunters, are the ones who ride off into the sunset. They're the ones who get the happy ending. It's an incredibly downbeat ending. The title, The Great Silence, or The Big Silence, obviously is a reference to the fact that the character is known as Silence because he's a mute, but it could also be, it's also fit into the film itself because the snowy landscapes that Corbucci uses to such great effect. Quite often you see a lone figure riding through the snowy wastes, the snow, almost the horse's legs buried in the snow, and the entire landscape is just deathly silent. I don't think it's Corbucci's best western. That honour, in my opinion, goes to the original Django, which I think is absolutely superb. But Corbucci never really made a bad western, and The Great Silence, The Big Silence, is an absolutely fantastic film that you should check out. There are copies of the entire film on YouTube. Obviously the film is out of copyright in certain territories, and hence the entire film is on YouTube. You can get it in an original Italian language with English subtitles. Talking about Red River, because I want to tie that into a book I'm reading at the moment, and that is Johnny D. Boggs' Return to Red River. I'm very much enjoying this book, so I'll be doing a review of that alongside a review of the John Wayne Montgomery Clift movie Red River. Anyway, so that with the snowy vistas in the films and the reasonably well-known cast, the Big Silence or the Great Silence gives the say that the Big Silence or the Great Silence is Klaus Kinski's best Western performance, and certainly is most rewarding. Kinski was always portrayed the villain in his westerns, and in this movie he's very much the villain, but he wins in the end, which is unusual for the actor and for the characters that he played. And that's what's interesting about this movie. It's kind of it's kind of political in a way, because what it says is that the bounty hunters in this movie, who are actually the bad guys, are the only ones operating within the law. Our hero, the mute Silence, is actually outside of the law. You know, he doesn't do anything wrong though, because he's a fast draw because of the pistol he uses. But he doesn't draw first. He always provokes the bounty hunters that he hates, that he's hunting down, to draw first. And there's a great scene in a saloon where he first flicks a match into Klaus Kinski's whiskey, and then the butt of his cigar, hoping to rile Kinski to draw. But Kinski knows what's going on, and he's not going to draw. He simply removes his gun belt and stands up and says he's unarmed now, you know, and man to man, he's more than a match for Silence. That again is a fantastic scene. Anyway, so that's the Great Silence or the Big Silence. A fantastic spaghetti western and well worth watching. If you've enjoyed this video, then I'd like to ask you to do me a little favor. Please click subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything, and it will help me grow this channel. Also, give this video a thumbs up and maybe leave a comment down below. That's